Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to talk about a couple of different forwards who are rumored to be on the trade market and go over whether or not the Toronto Maple Leafs should be interested in acquiring them. But before we jump into the couple of names that we're going to be talking about in today's video, I wanted to look over some numbers this season because there is a bit of a debate between Maple Leaf fans in what they should prioritize this trade deadline, whether or not they should go after a forward or a defenseman. And if we're looking at how the Maple Leafs have played so far this season, and we're looking at their defensive numbers compared to their offensive numbers at 5-on-5, they've been better defensively than what they have been offensively, and they've suffered a number of injuries on their blue line. The argument for the Maple Leafs to acquire a forward over a defenseman, if they were only able to afford one or just pick one, is rooted in that outside of guys like Nylander, Tavares, Marner, and Matthews, the Maple Leafs really aren't getting much scoring from the rest of their team. And I've said this now in multiple different videos, but the Maple Leafs in the regular season last year got 86 goals combined from Michael Bunting, Alex Kerfoot, Ilya Mikheyev, Pierre Engvall, and Anze Kasha, just to get 2 goals from those same 5 players in 7 games against the Lightning with an actual goalie in the net. And in the past couple of years, the Maple Leafs have had problems scoring goals in the playoffs, whether it be just their depth players scoring in the series against the Montreal Canadiens, or last year, like we said, just their top-end guys scoring against the Lightning. It's clear that they could use some extra help there. Not to mention that if you're looking at their lineup when everyone is healthy, Jake Muzzin probably doesn't end up coming back this season, if not at all. He may just be done for the rest of his career. We're still waiting on an update that we're supposed to get in February on him. The Maple Leafs currently have 8 NHL defensemen who I'm comfortable with rotating in and out of the lineup. Not to mention that since November the 11th, when TJ Brodie went out with an injury against the Penguins, and then a couple of games later, Morgan Rielly went down with an injury of his own, Rasmus Sandin and Timothy Liljegren have been playing top 4 minutes on the same pair together, and they've really taken a step in their development. Not only are the Maple Leafs controlling the majority of the quantity and quality of scoring opportunities when these two guys are on the ice, but they're also outscoring their opponents 13-3 at 5-on-5. They've just been awesome playing together. So if Sandin and Liljegren can continue to play that way in top 4 minutes, I don't see why the team would go out and spend valuable assets just to take away something that those young players have earned. I know it's just been 5 games for Connor Timmins, but I feel like the more that he plays, the more comfortable that he gets. And in the minutes that he's played so far, the Maple Leafs have controlled the vast majority of both the quantity and quality of scoring opportunities when he's been out there on the ice. He's been awesome. And even for a guy like a Jordy Ben, who could be a veteran presence on the blue line, throw some hits and block some shots, be kind of gritty, he could play both the left and the right side as well. So if these are the Maple Leafs' number 7 and number 8 defensemen going into the playoffs, I'm happy with their depth. So the first forward that I wanted to talk about that is rumored to be available in trade is Vancouver Canucks captain Bo Horvat, who's currently 5th in the NHL in goals. He's got 21 in 29 games, and he's been on an absolute heater to start this season. But as always with the Canucks, it's never a straightforward situation, because after starting the season 0-5-2 and looking like the sky was falling, they find themselves with a 13-8-1 record since then, and kind of just outside the playoff picture. 3 points out of a playoff spot with a number of teams in front of them, but still, nevertheless, just outside of a playoff spot. So then why would the Canucks want to trade away their captain, a player that they've drafted and developed, had on their team for a number of years, who is currently having a career year? Well, he is going to be a UFA at the end of this season. He's 27, turning 28, and from what it seems like, they offered him a contract in the summer at just over $5 million in 8 seasons, and it wasn't close to what Horvat and his camp wanted. They offered him another contract recently. They still weren't close, and now they're entertaining offers. This is nothing against the Canucks and their fans, but I absolutely hate talking about Vancouver, because it's never just as simple as, oh, the team's not very good and we have some players that we either can't afford to re-sign or we would like to move on from, so we'd like to get something in return for them before they leave in free agency. It's never as simple as that. There's always multiple layers of ridiculousness baked into it, And I've worked at TSN now for 6+ months, and I've listened to Farhan Lalji talk a lot, and I've never known him to say something that he wasn't confident in. And for him to say that when Bo Horvat and Luke Shen leave, that the room will only get more toxic, this team is broken. It's broken on multiple levels, from the ownership to the management group to the locker room itself. I don't know what they are, and I don't think they know what they are either. And for Bo Horvat to be in the middle of having a career year right now, I have no idea what a trade for him looks like. And neither does Pierre LeBrun, because in his recent column for The Athletic, he said that he assumed that the Canucks would be asking for a futures-only package, as selling and retooling teams most often do, but so far it seems like that Vancouver is looking instead for more of a hockey deal to upgrade at the center ice position and or a right-handed shot defenseman, and if possible, bring in a player in the 20-something range. The Maple Leafs don't have anything that the Vancouver Canucks want, because the Vancouver Canucks don't know what they want. And until they do, I don't think any team is in a position to make a trade for Bo Horvat. Don't let the defensive numbers fool you here. Over the last couple of seasons for Horvat, the Canucks are an awful defensive team, and he plays more minutes than anyone against all of the other team's best players. And relative to everyone else on the team, he's actually pretty good defensively, and he does it while being good offensively as well. He's a two-way centerman. He's 27 years old. He's having a career year. Yeah, I'd love to have him on my team. I don't think that this is a match. It's either going to be the sun and the moon or something that no contending team is willing to give up. And again, it's not a knock on any of the Canucks fans who maybe clicked on this video. I'm sorry that you guys are going through this. But the next player that I wanted to talk about here is Ryan O'Reilly, another captain, this time from the St. Louis Blues. And just like the Canucks, the Blues find themselves on the outside looking in of the playoff picture with a couple of teams in front of them. But unlike the Canucks, who are 7-3-0 in their last 10 games, the Blues have just been wildly inconsistent to the point where I don't know if they got it anymore. I don't know if Jordan Binnington has it anymore. I mean, this guy's single-handedly destroying both of my fantasy hockey teams, and I can't bring myself to just drop him because I'm afraid that he'll just start randomly playing well again. For the struggling Blues, O'Reilly is 31, turning 32 at the end of this season, and he'll also be an unrestricted free agent. Now, he's been decent for the Blues offensively this season, although him and his teammates have been kind of snake-bitten. That's why he's only got 15 points in 31 games so far, and defensively, he still plays a ridiculous amount of minutes against all the other team's best players, but he's taken a bit of a step back in that department over the last couple of seasons. He's not really the Ryan O'Reilly that most people would know from when the Blues won the Stanley Cup a couple of seasons ago. A dominant two-way force who could just carry your team. These numbers have bounced back a bit since the start of the season. They were a lot worse in the first month or so, but they're not necessarily where you would want them to be when you're considering the price tag that you'd have to pay to acquire Ryan O'Reilly, which would probably be something similar to what the Philadelphia Flyers got in return for Claude Giroux last season, which was a first, a third, and a prospect, basically. Ever since the Nick Foligno trade, when I see an aging two-way forward that's clearly not as good as what he used to be, it makes me nervous. But that also doesn't mean that I'm not interested, because if Ryan O'Reilly is able to pick up his play, but the Blues are in a position come the trade deadline where they are going to be sellers, it'd be really hard to say no to a dominant two-way centerman that would give the Maple Leafs a lot of extra flexibility. Now, the last name on this list, I'm going to need you guys to hear me out for a second, because in these videos, I usually like to talk about an option that's obviously very expensive, and then another option that may be a little bit cheaper, but still kind of expensive, really exciting, and then I like to throw in a value option. And oftentimes the value option has a lengthy list of pros and a lengthy list of cons, but the last player that I want to talk about in this video happens to also be a familiar face in James Van Riemsdyk, who could apparently be had for a mid-round pick. Like I said, I'm going to need you guys to hear me out on this one, because There is a list of pros, but there's also a list of cons, and the cons may be more readily apparent to those watching because Leaf fans know JVR quite well. He's 33, turning 34 at the end of this season. He will be an unrestricted free agent, and if the Flyers are willing to retain, he could be an interesting option because he does have 10 points in 11 games so far for the Flyers this year. Back in the 2017-2018 season, I don't think that there was a player in the NHL who was better in just the very ultra specific role that they were playing for their team at the time, because Van Riemsdyk scored 36 goals for the Maple Leafs playing under 15 minutes a night. And if you were watching the team back then, you'd know that it was a constant story all throughout that season because he was scoring at an historic pace for the amount of ice time that he was getting. If you just want goals and offense and an added element to your power play, the Maple Leafs have already laid out the perfect blueprint on how to get the most out of JVR as possible. And I've watched a number of Flyers games this year at work, and he may not be as quick as what he used to be, as what we would remember him to be, but he could still shoot the puck, and he could still tip it and screen goalies in front of the net. For as much as people have been longing for the Maple Leafs to acquire somebody who can really shoot the puck from the point on the power play, there's something to be said about a guy who can just stand in front of the net, tip pucks, screen goalies, and maybe make that weaker shot from the point a bit more effective. The Maple Leafs have the 11th ranked power play so far this season after finishing number 1 last year, but even when they had that dominant number 1 power play, there were times during the season when it got a bit stale. Having a guy like a JVR who could stand in front of the net, screen goalies, and just tip pucks in gives them an extra added element there that I think they've been missing ever since he left 5 years ago. I feel like videos like this get misinterpreted because I'm only talking about 3 of many names that could be available in a trade between now and the trade deadline. Obviously, I can't talk about all of them, and if I did, I wouldn't be able to say anything of substance about each player, or the video would be 2 or 3 hours long. You know, I talked about 3 or 4 players in a video a couple of weeks ago. We'll talk about 3 or 4 players in another video a couple of weeks from now. And just because I'm speaking positively about these 3 guys right now doesn't mean that they're necessarily at the top of my list of guys who I would like to see the Maple Leafs consider trading for. They're just 3 guys who I thought would be interesting to talk about. And James Van Riemsdyk, it's definitely not a perfect option. I'm not going to pretend like there aren't a lengthy list of cons, like him disappearing for several games at a time, or not being very physical despite his size, or not being the greatest defensively. But for a 4th round pick and maybe a middling prospect, could be an interesting option. And that's all this video is really meant to be, just going over some options and talking about stuff that might be interesting. So if you liked the video, make sure to like it if you did, and subscribe for more because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you again in the next one.